So what I'm going to talk about this evening is I'm principally, as Tammy mentioned, a wildlife artist, and I'm principally birds as well. And but plants, feature in many of my paintings, as you'll see. But I am going to talk a little bit about painting and about drawing and why that is important to me. And maybe some of you, do a wee bit of drawing as well. I don't know, but it is just a vehicle for opening our eyes. Having a pencil in the hand and a bit of paper on your knee. Just, if you're going to draw something, then you've really got to look at it as you perhaps never looked at anything before. And that is one of the great benefits of drawing, regardless of, the product, regardless of the actual drawing itself. It's this catalyst of awareness, if you like, that drawing brings to the seeing process. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as the evening goes on. So I'm going to focus principally on two habitats, particularly that have been important to me for various reasons that we'll come to. But obviously, plants are a great source of food for birds, and I'm just going to show, by way of an introduction, some paintings that depict that aspect. This is thistledown with goldenrod in the background as well. I was going to call this painting goldenrod, thistle and finch, but it sounded a bit too much like a firm of solicitors, so it just ended up being called Thistle and Finch, which sounds like a couple of detectives on a TV program. But anyway, it got the point. I'm not very good on titles. I just tend to describe what it is, which is often fairly obvious, but there you go. This is in soft pastel. I work in pastels a lot, particularly these days. You'll see other mediums as well that I've used throughout the years, and you'll see some of those. But I'm just sort of most comfortable working in pastel. I live in Aberdeenshire. Up in northeast Scotland, and we had quite a winter with an awful lot of snow. At one point, I measured 0.5 metre, 50 centimetres in our back garden, and up on the little hill into the forest, just not far from us, it was deeper than that. So, and frosts and cold to go with it. So the birds must have had a really hard time of it, and we found this bullfinch just feeding on wee shoots of heather that were just sticking out of the snow. The tree buds weren't, as you probably know, if you're a gardener or care for any fruit trees in your garden, the bullfinches really do like nipping the buds off in the springtime, and they certainly had a good go at our apple and pear trees here as well. But back in February, this was more the scene, and they were really struggling. But it just made for quite a nice picture. I mean, bullfinches are just beautiful and sort of a bit of a gift to bird artists anyway, particularly the males. So the females are lovely in their subtleties. And this one is done in hard pastels, which just gives a slightly more sort of linear graphic quality to it. I'm a great lover of Degas pastels, and he often had a linear quality to many of his work. And I'm, in a sense, sort of channeling my inner Degas in this painting. Briefly, just trees as very large plants. This is an oil painting, male siskin on larch. It's many of my earliest drawings that survived. I just always enjoyed drawing as a child. If I wasn't kicking a football around, then I was very happy just with a bit of pencil and a bit of paper, just drawing. And the drawings that survive, that I think my mum still has from when I was 9, 10, 11 or whatever, from our garden, and they're mostly of trees. And I wasn't drawing birds or anything like that in those days. It was trees and plants in the gardens. Drawings of daffodils, etc. So plants have been there for me as to draw all that time, all that way through. Many of my paintings of birds have been in trees over the years, but we would focus too much on those. So let's move on. This is goldfinch on the knapweed. We live in a rented accommodation in Aberdeenshire, on Deeside, if anyone knows Deeside, not far from Aboyne. And we have a very large garden, and we've done a bit with the front garden and turning it into a wildlife haven and a sort of a flower meadow. I'm married to a ranger naturalist who was working for the National Trust for Scotland and has lost her job through COVID last year, but has now just picked up a job with Cairngorms National Park. So we're delighted about that. But our back garden has obviously not been touched at all over the years and years, and is a fairly nice wildflower meadow in its own right. And there's a lot of knapweed, which provides great seed for the finches, particularly for goldfinches. And this was just drawn out the kitchen window, in actual fact, because again during the deep snow. And again, the birds struggling, but you know, they hit the knapweed hard back in the autumn. But there's obviously, hopefully, a few seeds left for them in that hard times during the winter. So just nice to be able to have that outside the door for me to stay warm, to be able to draw, but just to have these beautiful birds coming into the garden. So I'm going to concentrate now on two habitats in particular, and one of them is coastal. And we used to live in Dumfries and Galloway, and on the coast, a place called Rockcliffe, if any of you know Dumfries and Galloway. Dumfries and Galloway is a bit of a hidden gem. Most people just disappear up the M74 heading in, but just getting a little notice that my internet connection is unstable there. Hopefully it's okay. But yeah, Dumfries and Galloway is a wonderful place, and we lived right on the coast for many years. So just literally walking out the door, there was inspiration, you know, but whichever direction I walked in. This is actually on Orkney. I've got a few Orkney paintings. Orkney, I love the place. I don't know, hopefully some of you have been, and the coastal flowers there are just magnificent. Yes, they have their rarities like the Scottish primrose, but a lot of it is just a profusion of the flowers. And this is a site called Skibbergeo on Orkney mainland, and there's a little poignancy really to this, because this was actually painted back in about 2013 when we went to Orkney for the first time, and this site should have been hooching with Arctic terns, but Arctic terns, along with quite a few other bird species on Orkney at the time, guillemots and kittiwakes, were suffering greatly because of a lack of food in the seas around them. So they just didn't even bother breeding. You know, the adults were around, but they just weren't breeding. So this oystercatcher was, and this maybe highlights one of the things that attracts me to a view, to a possible image, is this this sort of contrast between the dark bird and the pale thrift. Obviously, thrift, as Tammy was talking about with the tall thrift, but this is obviously the sea thrift, which is obviously very salt tolerant and needs to be, and sort of tight cushions of sort of fleshy leaves, which helps to retain the moisture. So it's a harsh environment, which they have to tolerate, the wind and the cold and the salt-laden spray as well. But the oystercatcher was nestled down on eggs, and it was just sat nice and still for me to be able to draw it. But I say this light against dark, or dark against light aspect often just sort of catches my eye, stops me in my tracks, makes me want to paint. This is the other way around. This is light against dark. I went through a little phase of working in oils outside, which is a heck of a challenge, and some are doing it because I just finding it a wee bit too difficult. One of the things with working outdoors is that, you know, you don't always bear in mind the composition of a painting. It's just really a case of getting things down very quickly. And the attraction again was the light head against the dark background, but you know, getting it back, I started to notice that, you know, I wouldn't have had this little bud sort of going in towards the mouth. I wouldn't have had the tip. The cushion of thrift is just enormous. It wasn't, but I just sort of filled it in very quickly because you know, it was getting cold or windy or whatever. So working outdoors, you know, does throw up these challenges, but it is what attracts me to painting wildlife, and just that interaction with these living, beautiful living things that we share this amazing planet with, and again, the thrift itself is so important to this. It gives context. Yes, we know fulmars live on the coast. Anyway, or come into the coastal cliffs to nest, but obviously the thrift does give it context, and so, you know, I don't necessarily in that respect have to paint in particular great detail because of that aspect of including, you know, the plants and aspects of the bird's habitat into the painting. I was, you know, so yeah. So the rest of the painting, you know, it's a painting that sold a while ago. But I'm very pleased with how I coped with the head and the reflected light and the cast shadows and stuff like that. And really, some of these subtleties would be lost if you were to work from a photograph. And it's only when working from life and feeling that light, feeling that maybe heat as well, that you can then put that into your put that feeling into your paintings. And it is very much the light. We got, you know, thrift again, just in the background, and again this sort of light against dark against light. Got both things going on here in this peregrine falcon. But it's very often this, you know, capturing the light as much as anything, capturing a moment in time, and sometimes it's then necessary for me to use a medium that is a wee bit quicker. You know, working in oils and pastel outside to a certain extent, but certainly in oils, it's yeah, I find it quite a slow process. But so this is just in pencil and watercolor and just a very quick sketch, which was useful in its own right. I did use it as a source of a bigger painting back in the studio, but again, it's just this very, very quick interaction, not just with the bird before it might fly off, but also with the light on the bird, and obviously the light will move and change, you know, within sort of half an hour of you sitting down. So it is working with all these aspects of outside, but it is that aspects of setting, and it's particularly important to get a sense of scale. So it's rather than just drawing the bird, it's important for me to get something of the background down and be, again, putting the thrift in there. Just give a sense of scale, and this is the male bird. So this is the tercel. This is a slightly smaller than the female, and that you know, things like that are important. If it was the female, it's maybe about a third bigger. So the thrift correspondingly would look a little bit smaller. So that, you know, the things like that are important when I'm working outdoors. So we were back in Orkney in just a couple of years ago, and this is again the ski Geo, where we're looking at the oyster catcher, and it is just this mass of thrift and some wonderful coloured lichens on the rocks, and it's a spectacular location. And on this occasion, the terns were sitting tight. They were the partner, you know, was bringing in was bringing in the odd fish as well. So things were looking up. Things had changed for whatever reason. I don't think quite sure why they declined in the first place. You know, obviously some sort of climate change, and the kittiwakes and guillemots haven't recovered to the same levels they were before. They declined massively, but thankfully the Arctic terns, and by consequence, erratical on the terns. So they will chase the terns and try and get them to disgorge the fish that they've taken. So if the Arctic terns aren't bringing in fish, then the skuas aren't going to be breeding either. And there was some concern that Orkney would lose, and the UK would lose breeding Arctic skuas because of the situation with the seas around Orkney. But this also highlights this was done from sketches. But it's also in my studio. It was quite a big painting, and which sold at the Bird Fair a couple of years back. And but it just gives me a little bit of artistic license. So this is in pastel again, and pastel is a fantastic mark making medium. I also love the strong bright colours that pastels suggest to me, and I have in a box. And it's this sort of this artistic license, this conversation I have between me and the painting. Yes, the turns are done fairly realistically, and the scale with having the thrift there. But mostly everything else was green because of the vegetation. But I just played around with the colours and trying to introduce some of the lichen colours with the sort of yellow ochre there in the painting as well. And this is where I get quite excited about working in the studio, when I'm just sort of liberated a little bit. So when I'm working outdoors, there's a part of me. I was trained as a scientist. I gave up art at school as soon as I could. I didn't really enjoy the art at school. So I worked as a geologist, geochemist for the British Geological Survey. So there's a sort of scientific element to my psyche, which when I'm drawing outdoors, you know, I've got to sort of get things right, whatever right means, but sort of observe them accurately. Because of that scientific background as much as anything, but also because to do that opens my eyes to what's in front of me at any given moment. So the turns are fairly accurately observed, and say the scale, as we were talking about before as well. But back in the studio, and sort of liberated a little bit from that tightness, and can just play around with color combinations and mark making, and trying to create something visually interesting, visually exciting. Obviously, the two heads and the direction of the beaks of creating a sort of focal point. But I just love this combination of the tail streamers, the long tail streamers on the Arctic tern, and the crossed over primaries, you know, the long primary wings on the tern, and it's just a really nice sort of combination there. But it's taking these observations from the field, and then maybe working with them and playing with them in the studio, which I quite enjoy that combination of the two elements. So I'm moving away from thrift to sea campion or white campion, and I feel this painting should have a caption to it, sort of, you know, after you, or no, please, after you. But the lovely interaction between the two puffins. I love. So, you know, saying, you know, with the thrift before, the flowers, the plants, whatever, you create a context, by all means. But you could argue in this piece then that there's a sort of decorative element to them as well, and that's absolutely true. And the painting just wouldn't be the same without them. And there's also sort of arc of campion across the top of the birds' heads, you know, just works quite nicely as well. there's a great, the sharpest edges on the campion is here. So the light against dark, which is, obviously where the concentration is on the puffin's head. There's always, with puffins, the eye always tends to, will go down to the feet because of the orange feet. But it's just this movement that's probably from up the feet, up through this lovely sort of what we would call a negative shape, which I also quite like playing around with, as did Degas, if you were familiar with some of his work. But the sharpest edges are often where the focal point, is. And then as we go off the side here, I just kept things softer. The edges are much softer. The campion is far less defined. And so the eye tends not to stay over here too long. It comes back to the sort of focal point. But it's just that arc of vegetation, the arc of flowers, I just think works very nicely in the composition. And it is composition, obviously when you're painting, it does become a factor. This is, I don't know if it's the same film we drew before. It's certainly a similar location, which was very close to where we lived in Dumfries and Galway. And this is a mayweed of some description. I'm not couldn't give you the exact. There is a sea mayweed. I know that much. But that's that sort of family anyway. And I know this is only a sketch done again on the spot by way of trying to capture the light, the bird, and the flower. But if you took the flowers out of this, then there would be very little movement around the picture. We just, flowers are there. We get this, hopefully, our eye wants to go to that eye because it's a strong contrast. And then it'll come down the bird and across the flowers. And again, if this had become a studio painting, I probably would have put another flower head just in here, so that just this loop back across, and you can again have this movement of the eye around a painting. And that's what one of the things that an artist is aiming to do, is to try and attract you as a viewer through the painting. Often the eye comes in at the bottom of a painting, which why we often get rivers or paths through a woodland starting at the bottom. But here the eyes going up to here, and then it's coming down and round again. The danger is, though, of course, that there's a strong contrast and a sharp edge here between the mayweed flower head. And so probably if it became a studio painting, I would darken around the top of the fulma so that the eye is just maybe attracted to here a little bit more strongly than it is to this point. So that's just by way of using the vegetation not only as context, not only as decoration, but also very much in the composition, and it becomes important from that point of view. And it's the same here as well. There are 8 million seabirds come to the UK to breed, come to our cliffs, because as the cold Arctic waters come down from the north and they meet the warm waters coming up from the Gulf Stream, then we get an upwelling of nutrients, and the nutrients are food for plankton, and plankton are food for fish, and the fish are food for birds. So we have all these fantastic sea cliffs around the coast. So it's just perfect from the bird's point of view. They're probably only with us for 3 months or so. But these rock ledges are crucial, and it's not just about rock, it is about the vegetation that spills over the rocks, whether it's the thrift or campion or mayweeds or whatever it might be. And they become important for me as an artist. And again, this is just a sketch. I mean, I love the shapes of the sort of sculptural perfection of kilimots. They're just a beautiful shape in their own right. And again, the same location on the Galloway coast. And this is the same. This is a more fully realised studio painting. My original drawing only had that razor billing, excuse me. But my final painting my final painting, I decided to put the other two in. But again, it's, you know, the mayweed here just breaks it up, just leads the eye in a little bit, just helps. If you take that lot out, then it's not quite so interesting as a painting. So yeah, it's just important in many ways. Just a couple of other coastal habitats. This is just a little bit of salt marsh, and I was drawn to painting this for many reasons. And there's the red buoy there, which attracts the eye. There's the diagonal fence, which has got a load of seaweed on it. Drift, but other vegetation in there, giving a sort of a range of greens, which is just makes me quite interested as an artist. And again, with the mark making ability of pastel, I can really enjoy putting this foreground together, and not putting too much detail in it, because again, we want the eye to move up through the painting. We don't want the eye to stop down here too much. But it's just a lot of fun putting this painting together. Just a couple of other habitats. This is shingle. This is actually a place called Folney Island on the southwest tip of the Lake District. So Cumbria, you have Walney Island. This is Folney Island. Folney Island is only an island at high tide, but it has this wonderful shingle habitat, which is it's a fairly unstable, barren, I guess nutrient poor, dry, well drained habitat. So it's not, you wouldn't have thought, very attractive to plants or to birds, but there are some obviously specialities that what's the way, anyway, for create this habitat. All I'm doing, the sort of plants like yellowhorn poppy and sea kale and sea campion and viper's bugloss and all those sort of plants. So all I'm trying to do here is just get a feel for the color and for the vegetation that can grow on this unstable, dry substrate, and because it can do so, it also creates a habitat for birds to nest and to feed as well. And these are little terns, and shingle is a very important habitat for breeding little terns in the UK. There were Arctic terns and ring plovers there as well. But the plants colonizing the shingle just allows other species to use it and frequent it, and with it being an island, and hopefully it hasn't got many by way of ground predators. It has got aerial predators, of course, and that was an issue. Having chatted to the warden on Folney, they can fence out the ground predators, but they can't fence out the aerial predators. Anyway. This is a fairly dodgy, one-legged, strange egret, which I, in many ways, wish I hadn't put in. So this is a salt marsh, which I went down to see with a friend of mine, a good friend of myself and Tammy, John Cox, and I love the colour of the salt marsh as much as anything. I can't remember. This must have been autumn time, I think. We were down there, but it just this path into the painting, and the eye can just go both. You can go that way, or it can actually go that way. There's a little plank of some description there, and into the boats. So I didn't actually need the birds, but I think I had to put it in because it was a wildlife exhibition that I was doing. But it's just the colours and all these just creeks and bits of, and it's just wonderful from an artist's point of view, just to have all this movement, and it was just great. And this is North Norfolk. This is Stiffkey Marsh. And this is just before the sun goes down, where the marsh just glows again in the autumn. And that sort of burn. I'm far happier with this little egret than I was with the previous one. And again, it's this contrast between the light. It's this contrast between the light and the dark. And this was done at the same time with a couple of lapwing. These are the seed heads of sea aster. Again in the autumn time, and but just providing wonderful colours for me to have a little bit of fun with, and of course the just the habitat and the mark making. These last two paintings done in oils. We'll just look at some wetland. Wetland is my other sort of default habitat of moving to. This is also again on Orkney. The wee lochen behind holds breeding red-throated divers, which was very exciting. But in actual fact, it wasn't a very good day. They disappeared into the murk, but there was an oyster catcher sitting in front of the hide, surrounded by the marsh marigold, and I just thought, yeah, you know what? That'll make a nice wee painting. So we did it. But every June, late June, early July, I used to go down to Lancashire, sort of around the Preston area, again to stay with our friend John. And on the Lancashire mosses vegetation, and these are a couple of black-tailed godwits. So even in sort of early June, late June, early July, probably Icelandic godwits that maybe haven't bred. They're returning south already, so they're still in spectacular breeding plumage. And these are the seed heads of yellow rattle. And it's the vegetation that this is Marsh Side RSPB Reserve. And the vegetation there is just wonderful with lots of orchids and all sorts of stuff. And just inland is Martin Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. And if you remember that very hot summer we had two years ago, I sort of decamped to Martin Mere and spent 3 days in the hides there, which were, with the windows open, were actually quite cool, and there was nobody else in there. You know, nobody was venturing out into that heat. So I had the hides to myself, and I concentrated mostly on the shelduck and the shell ducklings. But again, the vegetation is one of the attractions, and it was fairly burnt by that time, even by late June. It was fairly burnt. So we had interesting color combinations of the sort of luxuriant greens and the sort of almost sandy, burnt out, dried grasses, but the flower heads in between, and the sort of reddy browns here, a little bit of artistic license again, just sort of trying to bring in a slightly different elements. But the shelduck was trying to give shade. This is a female shelduck. Give shade to the wee ducklings, the shell ducklings there. But again, that was just gave me some lovely color combinations, and the flowers in the background, just allowing me that just to play again with the decorative elements. But it gives the context again to the piece. And then this is the same. This is just lapwing again post breeding, but just nestled down, just bunkered down in the vegetation for the day. And this was a little acrylic sketch I did at the time, and I haven't got a clue what all the plants are. I'm sorry. I needed my naturalist wife with me to sort them all out. But it's just yeah, it just creates a for me, a wonderful painting, and those themselves. I mean, I love lapwing, and I know Tammy does, and all those colours on a lapwing. But I've just got as much joy and delight from the vegetation as anything. And this was completely, the same time. It's hasn't come out as a very good image. I'm sorry, but this is an oil painting done at the time as well. Or one of those visits, and again, just all that wonderful yellow contrasting with the colours on the lapwings. Also, again, it's at Martin Mere, and I do. I mean, the white lilies, as we saw with the dab chick on the first slide, are lovely. But I do like our more native yellow iris water lily. Sorry. And it was that attracted me to the painting. It just, yes, the moorhen went across at one point and thought, oh, yeah, we'll put that in. But I didn't sit down to paint the moorhen. Yes, it's made the painting for sure, but I actually sat down to paint the water lilies there. And this one is back at Marshside. Again, I couldn't tell you what the vegetation was. It was just the light, the backlit light, the backlit godwits, the backlit vegetation, and combination of shadows and birds movements, and again, sort of negative spaces of the water in between, just attracted me to the scene as much as anything. And I enjoy putting these sort of paintings together from so I just keep getting a little notice coming up that I apologize and hope it's still coming across absolutely fine. Can
still hear you, John.
Yeah,
to be fair, I've got a full-on lightning thunderstorming Horncastle, so it also might be my broadband wibbling.
Okay, that sounds exciting. But obviously wetlands are exciting in the winter as well. With all the reed beds and stuff. And again, this is back on the Norfolk. This is at Holcombe, North Norfolk coast. I was down there one November for an exhibition, and the snow came, and I just loved. It was freezing, but I just had to spend time out on those marshes with those snowy conditions. I'm just going to finish with. I'm a member of the Society of Wildlife Artists, but I'm also a member of the Artists for Nature Foundation. And the only criteria for being a member of that is you get a project back in 2010 to Sark in the Channel Islands. And those of you who've been to Sark or knew Sark before 2010, probably, especially if we went in May, and particularly if you did go at that time of year, it just, they're just full of flowers. Sark is just flowers. All the fields have not been, improved. So this is all sort of just buttercups and daisies, but it's just covered. Yes, there's a little bit of green in the foreground, but you can't see much grass. At all, and again the coastal flowers, the campions and thrift again, with that way of life and that that vegetation and those fields were threatened because the Sark brothers who live on neighbouring Brecku, the Sark brothers who own it's a Telegraph, I think, and the Ritz and billionaires were trying to buy up Sark and plant vineyards on it. Was just, you just think it's such a travesty. We talk about ecocide these days, and that was, for me, that was ecocide. So we were there as artists to celebrate the positives. I mean, and we weren't, the Artists for Nature Foundation is not a political, it's a charity, but it hasn't, it doesn't have a political voice. But we were certainly used as a political tool, and there was a beautiful book resulting from our trip there, Art for the Love of Sark, it was called, and it's worth having a look at. But we were just celebrating what was there, and so a lot of the time we just sat down and painted the fields, and this was another one. This was just buzzing with insects and loads of butterflies, and this very old ancient hawthorn hedge, and all the umbellifers and the goldenrod again, and all sorts of stuff. And it was just, I wasn't commissioned to do it, but I was asked to go and paint this field because the girl who to the left-hand side, and this field was going to be ploughed up, and sort of sitting in that field, I felt a great, sort of sadness, but also a huge sort of weight of responsibility. Because yes, there'd be photographs of it. Her parents had taken many photographs of it, but this might be the only painting of that field that would ever exist. And you always hope, it's a very naive thought we have as artists. But on this trip, you did think it might actually make a difference, and it did. The Sark brothers eventually sort of retreated bit by bit from Sark, and its way of life, with no mains electricity and no mains water and no street lights, etc., no vehicles. There are tractors, but mostly it's horses and horse-drawn. And it's a wonderful place if you ever get a chance to go, and you've never been. But the publicity that this project created and the book did actually say, so this field did not get ploughed up in the end, and it was just so joyful to hear. And the girl Rosie, who created the project, did eventually acquire this painting and gave it to her parents. So that's hopefully that just gives you some idea of what I've, what I paint, the way I go about it, why plants are important to me, to my painting, and it's not the decorative element, even though admittedly there as well. It's much more important than that. So. I hope that, as I say, just gives you some idea, and we shall stop there.